At a lavish gala filled with billionaires and glittering gowns, one powerful father thought nothing could surprise him. But then, he watched in shock as a young black waitress did something no doctor, no therapist, and not even he himself had ever done. She gave his disabled son the chance to lead a dance. What happened on that dance floor not only silenced the entire room, but it shattered the walls around the billionaire's heart and changed the direction of his life forever. Stay with this story until the very end, because the moment you'll hear might just change the way you see kindness, power, and humanity itself. Jonathan Mercer was a man who lived in a world most people could never imagine. His fortune stretched across continents, built on steel, finance, and influence. People spoke his name in boardrooms with a mixture of fear and respect. He was a man who had everything, or at least it looked that way. What the public never saw was his private silence, the emptiness behind his carefully tailored suits, and the distance between him and his only son, Ethan. Ethan had been born with cerebral palsy, a condition that left him unable to move with the ease other children enjoyed. For Jonathan, who built his empire on control and perfection, his son's vulnerability was a wound he never spoke of. The billionaire often kept Ethan in the shadows of private caregivers, specialists, and tutors, shielding him from the world. It wasn't malice, it was fear. Fear of pity, of whispers, of judgment. Jonathan didn't realize that in protecting Ethan from the world, he was also denying his son the fullness of living in it. When Jonathan reluctantly agreed to attend a local charity gala, he treated it as another public duty, a social mask. He never imagined that one small, ordinary moment in a crowded ballroom would pierce through his guarded heart. What he saw that night, hidden in plain sight, would challenge everything he thought he knew about dignity, love, and humanity. Among the glittering crowd of silk gowns and polished shoes, no one noticed the young waitress weaving through the ballroom. Her name was Maya. To most, she was invisible, just another uniformed server balancing trays of champagne. But Maya carried her own unshakable strength. She had grown up in a neighborhood where dreams were often suffocated by struggle, where prejudice was an everyday shadow. Yet her mother had raised her with a simple creed: dignity is not given by society, it's lived through kindness. Maya had taken the job at the gala to pay for her college tuition. But more than that, she knew the way people glanced past her, never seeing her humanity. She had learned to smile anyway, to treat every guest not as a title, but as a person. When her eyes fell on Ethan Mercer, sitting quietly at the edge of the dance floor, her heart tugged. She noticed his eager eyes tracking the couple swirling in synchronized steps. He seemed desperate to belong to that rhythm, but trapped within the stillness of his chair. Most guests ignored him, afraid of the discomfort his presence reminded them of. Maya did not. She paused, balancing her tray, and something inside her whispered that this boy deserved not just sympathy, but participation, his own chance to move with the music. She didn't know who his father was. She didn't know she was about to stand at the center of a moment that could ripple across a billionaire's life. Ethan had spent most of his young life on the outside looking in. He loved music, its rhythms, its freedom, but his body rarely obeyed the commands of his heart. Surrounded by strangers laughing, twirling, and applauding one another, he felt invisible, as though his chair made him untouchable. He glanced at his father, who sat in silence at their private table. Jonathan's face, as always, was unreadable, locked in a mask of composure. Ethan longed for his father to see him, not as someone fragile, not as someone broken, but as a son yearning to belong. When Maya approached, Ethan's eyes lit with cautious hope. She knelt so her gaze met his, not from pity, but from respect. For the first time that night, Ethan felt recognized. Without drawing attention, Maya placed her tray aside and extended her hand. She gently guided Ethan's hand upward, letting him rest it in hers. With her other hand, she pressed the button to move his chair forward, onto the very edge of the dance floor. She let the music dictate the moment, swaying her own body in rhythm, letting Ethan's gestures lead her. Every movement was small, imperfect, but it was real. And in that imperfection, it was beautiful. The room, once filled with careless chatter, began to hush. Guests turned, curiosity shifting into awe. And for the first time in his life, Jonathan Mercer's empire of walls began to crack. Jonathan sat frozen, his eyes riveted on the sight unfolding before him. His son, his Ethan, was dancing, not confined by limitations, not defined by medical charts, but alive in a way Jonathan had never witnessed. The waitress, this young woman he had overlooked, wasn't leading Ethan out of pity. She was following him, allowing him to direct the rhythm, treating him as an equal partner. The billionaire's chest tightened. All the money he had spent on doctors, specialists, and therapies had never given Ethan this moment. Yet here, in the span of a few minutes, a stranger had done what Jonathan himself had failed to do: see his son fully. Guests around the room began clapping softly, then louder, until the music seemed to rise in celebration. Jonathan felt eyes on him, waiting for his reaction. For a man used to commanding every room he entered, it was disorienting to realize he had been blind to the most important truth standing right in front of him. As the song faded, Maya bowed gracefully to Ethan, her smile soft but proud. Jonathan could not remember the last time his son had looked so radiant, his laughter bubbling with unguarded joy. And in that moment, Jonathan's wealth felt like ash in his hands. Because what good was power if he had missed the very essence of life itself? The night could have ended there, a fleeting spark in a crowded gala. But something shifted within Jonathan. He didn't applaud out of politeness. Instead, he stood, awkward and unsure, but deeply moved. Guests watched in surprise as the billionaire crossed the floor and knelt beside his son. For Ethan, that simple act was louder than applause. For Maya, it was proof that kindness, even in its smallest form, could ripple into places unreachable by wealth or status. In the days that followed, Jonathan could not shake the memory. He began to question the way he had shielded Ethan from the world, the way he had tried to hide what he saw as vulnerability instead of embracing it as strength. He thought about Maya, not as the waitress, but as the teacher he never expected. Jonathan's empire had been built on control, but his son had taught him freedom. And Maya had reminded him that humanity was not found in boardrooms, but in small acts of grace that reveal the soul. Within weeks, Jonathan reached out quietly to Maya. He discovered she was studying education, working night shifts to afford tuition. Rather than offering charity, he offered opportunity, a scholarship fund not just for her, but for others like her, whose kindness and determination deserved recognition. For Ethan, Jonathan began to open doors once closed. He enrolled him in inclusive programs where he could express himself through music, art, and friendship. No longer hidden, Ethan flourished, his laughter becoming the melody of their home. Jonathan himself changed. He attended events not to network, but to witness life. He spoke not just of profits, but of inclusion, of dignity, of the value of every person regardless of wealth or circumstance. In his speeches, he never named Maya, but he often spoke of the night a stranger with kindness taught him what all his billions could not buy. Years later, Jonathan Mercer's legacy was no longer defined solely by steel towers or financial empires, but by something far more enduring. Foundations for inclusive arts programs, scholarships for students from underprivileged backgrounds, and initiatives celebrating people with disabilities carried his name. But he knew the true credit belonged to the unseen waitress who chose to see his son as more than a chair, more than a diagnosis. Ethan grew into a young man of confidence, often retelling the story of the night he first danced, the night he first felt free. Maya continued her journey too, becoming an educator who inspired countless students with the same quiet strength she once gave a boy on the sidelines. And Jonathan, though still a billionaire, learned that wealth is not measured in numbers, but in the moments that stir the heart, challenge prejudice, and open our eyes to truths we once ignored. Because sometimes, it only takes a single act of kindness to change the direction of an empire. And so the question lingers for all of us. What invisible moments of humanity are we overlooking, simply because we're too busy to see?